Aarav, Nair, and Meera Kashyap were the couple everyone envied. A handsome Indian pilot and a glowing travel blogger whose love story looked picture perfect. But what began as a dream honeymoon in Bora Bora quickly turned into a nightmare, drenched in jealousy, control, and blood. Beneath the crystal waters of paradise, a dark secret waited to surface. And when it did, the world would learn that even the most beautiful love can hide the most violent heart. Aarav Nair had always been the man everyone admired. At 32, he had achieved what many only dreamed of. As a commercial pilot for a top airline in India, he was respected for his precision, discipline, and striking confidence. With his perfectly pressed uniform and calm demeanor, Aarav looked like the kind of man who had his life under complete control. Behind that composed exterior, however, lived a man consumed by his need to be in command of his work, his surroundings, and soon his wife. Meera Kashyap was different in every way. She was light where he was heavy, free-spirited where he was structured. A 27-year-old travel blogger with thousands of followers, Meera loved the chaos of airports, the noise of new cities, and the beauty of uncertainty. Her world was color, creativity, and expression. When their paths crossed through a mutual friend at a luxury travel event in Mumbai, their connection seemed instant. He admired her energy and she was drawn to his confidence. Their romance grew fast, full of expensive dinners, scenic getaways, and perfect photographs for Meera's followers. To the world, they looked like the ideal modern couple. Successful, attractive, and deeply in love. Their wedding was nothing short of a spectacle. Families flew in from across the country. Lavish floral arches lined the venue, and the ocean shimmered as they took their vows. Meera wore an elegant ivory lehenga, while Aarav looked regal in his pilot-inspired sherwani. Every guest saw them as the definition of perfection. Every post on Meera's page glowed with joy. Yet behind her smile, small moments had already begun to bother her. His possessive glances, his habit of reading her messages, his irritation when she spent too much time taking photos. She dismissed them as newlywed adjustment issues, unaware that they were early warnings of something far more dangerous. When Aarav surprised her with tickets to Bora Bora for their honeymoon, Meera was thrilled. It was a destination she had always dreamed of. Turquoise waters, floating villas, and endless horizons. She pictured days of romance and nights under the stars, capturing memories for her travel page. Aarav, too, imagined perfection, but of a different kind. A honeymoon where she would focus solely on him. No cameras, no followers, no distractions. The flight was long, but filled with quiet moments. Meera gazed out the window, lost in thoughts of paradise, while Aarav's mind played over every detail of control. The moment they arrived, the resort welcomed them with garlands and coconut water. Their villa stood over crystal-clear water, with glass floors and a private pool. To Meera, it felt like a dream come true. She took pictures of everything, the sunset, the lagoon, the delicate flowers. While Aarav watched her, a faint stiffness in his jaw. To anyone watching, they were the perfect newlyweds, laughing, walking hand in hand, glowing with happiness. But behind closed doors, something darker was already beginning to grow. Aarav's love was turning into possession, his admiration into resentment, and as the waves of Bora Bora gently kissed the shore outside their villa, the paradise that was meant to begin there forever had already started its quiet descent into tragedy. By the third day in Bora Bora, the illusion of a perfect honeymoon had already begun to crumble. The smiles that had once come so easily now felt forced. Meera, who had planned to document their trip for her blog, had stopped posting altogether. Her phone, usually filled with laughter and filters, stayed untouched on the bedside table. To her followers, this silence meant she was savoring her private time with her husband. But inside their overwater villa, a quiet storm was forming, one far more dangerous than the weather outside. Aarav had become restless. Every little thing about Meera's behavior irritated him. The way she spoke on calls with her friends, the way she admired the sunset before dinner, even the way she smiled for the resort staff. He felt as if every glance she gave the world was a betrayal. Meera tried to stay calm, brushing off his sudden bursts of moodiness as stress from work or jet lag. But the more she tried to keep peace, the more distant he became. Resort staff began noticing small, unusual signs. Aarav often appeared alone, his posture stiff, eyes cold. He spent hours at the beach bar, drinking slowly while staring into the ocean. When asked about his wife, he would smile politely and say she wasn't feeling well. One night, housekeeping staff heard the sound of shattering glass from their villa. They knocked to check, but Aarav opened the door halfway, assuring them everything was fine. Behind him the lights were dim, and the air felt tense. The following morning, Meera's wrist carried faint bruises. She wore long sleeves despite the tropical heat. She kept her distance, spending hours by the pool or on the deck with her journal. Aarav, on the other hand, spent more time controlling than enjoying. He went through her phone when she showered, deleted messages from male friends, and accused her of hiding things from him. Meera's laughter faded completely. It all spiraled further when Aarav discovered a message from one of Meera's photographer friends, congratulating her on her marriage and suggesting a future collaboration. The message was innocent, but Aarav's jealousy flared like fire. He confronted her with icy silence, and the tension that followed was suffocating. By the 5th day, a storm rolled over the island. Dark clouds swallowed the horizon, and heavy rain began to lash against the villas. The resort advised guests to stay indoors. Meera sat by the window, watching the lightning flash across the water, her reflection pale against the glass. Aarav sat behind her brooding, replaying the same thoughts in his head. The message, her laughter, her growing distance. What should have been a honeymoon filled with love and peace had turned into a slow psychological war. The rain outside mirrored the chaos inside their villa. Meera didn't know that this storm would not pass. It would only build until it consumed everything. Her marriage, her dreams, and eventually her life. The night of the storm was when everything finally shattered. Wind howled through the palm trees, and the sound of thunder echoed across the lagoon. Inside the villa, the rain pounded against the glass walls like a warning no one could hear. Aarav and Meera had spent most of the evening in silence. The atmosphere felt heavy, almost electric. The calm that existed between them wasn't peace. It was the quiet before destruction. Meera tried to retreat into her journal, writing about the island's beauty, maybe as a way to remind herself that she was still part of the world outside that villa. Aarav sat across the room, his eyes fixed on her, burning with unspoken rage. The storm outside seemed to mirror his thoughts, each flash of lightning illuminating the tension between them. He had been drinking again, pacing back and forth, trapped in his own obsession. The message on her phone had replayed in his mind for days, twisting into proof of betrayal that didn't exist. At some point during the night, the argument began again. It started small, accusations whispered in anger, but quickly grew into shouts that drowned beneath the roar of the rain. Meera tried to walk away, but Aarav followed, his voice rising, his emotions spiraling out of control. The wind rattled the windows, and the villa seemed to close in around them. She stumbled, tried to defend herself, but his rage was too far gone. He struck her once, then again, harder each time, until her body collapsed against the floor. The sound of the rain outside swallowed her final breath. For a long moment, Aarav stood frozen, staring at what he had done. His breathing was uneven, his heart racing, his hands trembling. The room was filled with the smell of blood and sea air. He tried to convince himself it wasn't real, that she would wake up, that he hadn't crossed the line he swore he never would. But when he knelt beside her, the truth stared back at him in silence. Panic set in. He stumbled to the sink, washing his hands, scrubbing at the red stains that refused to disappear. He changed his shirt, then turned back to her lifeless body, trying to think clearly. The logical pilot inside him took over. He had to make it look like an accident. He dragged her toward the deck, leaving faint streaks of blood on the marble floor. The glass door creaked open as rain blew in, soaking everything. He placed her near the edge, arranging her as if she had slipped and hit her head during the storm. Then he sat back inside, shaking, staring at the water as lightning flashed across her still form. When morning came, Aarav's voice was calm when he told the staff his wife was missing. He claimed she must have gone for a swim before sunrise and never returned. The staff rushed to search the lagoon, unaware that the woman they were looking for was already gone, floating beneath the same turquoise water she once called paradise. The next morning, Bora Bora woke to calm skies as if the storm had never existed. The sun reflected off the lagoon, masking the horror that hid beneath its surface. Aarav appeared at the resort's reception, his voice trembling just enough to sound believable. He told the staff that his wife had gone out for a swim early in the morning and hadn't come back. Panic spread quickly. The management alerted local authorities, and within an hour, search boats were out combing the crystal blue waters around the villas. At first, no one suspected foul play. It wasn't unusual for tourists to swim early, even after a storm. But the resort staff had noticed small details that didn't sit right. The villa's deck had streaks of blood faintly washed away by rain. Inside, a vase was broken and a chair was overturned. When questioned, Aarav appeared nervous but tried to mask it with grief. He told the police that his wife had been feeling unwell and emotional the previous night. He claimed she might have slipped while walking near the water. Hours later, the worst was confirmed. Meera's body was found floating near coral rocks not far from the villa. The moment rescuers pulled her from the water, something felt wrong. Her injuries were too severe for an accidental fall. Bruises covered her arms and neck, and there were deep marks on her face. The coroner's early report mentioned blunt force trauma to the head, a wound that couldn't have come from slipping. As police questioned Aarav again, his story began to crumble. Surveillance footage from the resort showed him leaving the villa multiple times during the night, pacing along the deck before disappearing inside. Staff members reported hearing loud noises and a woman's cry just hours before the storm peaked. One housekeeper even recalled seeing Aarav with scratches on his arm the next morning. Investigators searched the villa in detail. Under the bed, they found traces of blood that had been hastily wiped away. A shattered piece of the broken vase bore Meera's fingerprints mixed with his. The evidence was stacking up fast. When police asked him to provide his phone for examination, he hesitated but eventually handed it over. Forensics found no unusual messages, but they did find something he had missed. Meera's phone, tucked deep inside the couch cushions, was still there. When investigators opened it, they discovered the final piece of the puzzle. Meera had taken several short videos earlier that night. Though dark and shaky, one clip captured Aarav's voice raised in anger, followed by a loud thud. Another showed her reflection in the mirror, tears streaking her face as thunder rumbled in the background. The final video cut off abruptly, moments before her death. The discovery sealed his fate. Police confronted Aarav with the evidence, and his demeanor shifted from sorrowful to emotionless. He no longer tried to explain. The man once seen as calm and composed had become cold and detached. Bora Bora's paradise had turned into a crime scene, and the pilot who once soared the skies was now grounded forever, trapped in his own monstrous act. The trial of Aarav Nair began 6 months later in Tahiti under immense public scrutiny. The case had captured international attention: an Indian pilot, a tropical paradise, and a honeymoon that ended in murder. Both Indian and French media covered every hearing, every photograph, and every grim revelation that surfaced. Aarav arrived in court in a gray prison uniform, clean-shaven, calm, and almost emotionless. He sat quietly as prosecutors began to build the story of how a man's obsession destroyed the woman he once promised to love forever. The evidence against him was overwhelming. Forensic experts described the pattern of injuries on Meera's body: bruises consistent with strangulation, and blunt force trauma that could not have been caused by a simple fall. The bloodstains under the bed, the broken vase, and the footage from the resort cameras all painted a chilling picture. Most devastating of all were the recordings found on Meera's phone. When played in court, the room fell silent. The muffled argument, the sound of a blow, and Meera's faint sobs before the recording abruptly ended left no doubt about what had happened that night. Aarav's defense tried to argue that it had been a tragic accident, claiming that the storm had made the deck slippery and that Meera might have fallen during a heated argument. But his lack of visible emotion, his inconsistent statements, and his attempts to clean the crime scene destroyed any sympathy the court might have had. Witnesses from the resort testified about the tension between them, the bruises they had noticed on Meera, and Aarav's strange behavior after her death. Each testimony drove another nail into his defense. When the verdict was read, there was no sound except the judge's voice echoing through the chamber. Aarav Nair was found guilty of murder and sentenced to life imprisonment without parole. He stood motionless, eyes fixed ahead, showing no sign of regret or disbelief. The man who once controlled an aircraft at 30,000 feet had lost control of everything: his freedom, his reputation, and the life he had destroyed with his own hands. Back in India, the story spread like wildfire. News channels dissected every detail of the case, while social media filled with outrage and grief. Meera's followers turned her last travel post into a virtual memorial, a photo of her standing by the ocean with the caption, "The happiest place on earth." It became a haunting symbol of how fragile life and love can be. Her family brought her ashes home to Delhi, where hundreds gathered for her final farewell. Friends described her as kind, fearless, and full of dreams that would never come true. In contrast, Aarav's family publicly disowned him, cutting all ties. Years later, the villa in Bora Bora, where the murder happened, remained empty. Staff whispered that no couple ever stayed there again. The turquoise waters still sparkled under the sun, but for those who knew the story, that beauty carried a shadow. A reminder that even paradise can hide evil, and that love, when twisted by control and rage, can turn deadly.